Hello, everybody. Victor here from Need Some Introduction. So, as you may have noticed, anyone who still is subscribing to this feed, that we've been gone for quite some time now. Before I get into a little explanation as to what's been going on and what that might mean to the podcast going forward, I did want to mention the fact that I will be talking with Sona about a new FX Hulu series, A Murder at the End of the World. So, pretty traditional. We're covering a series of television, probably week to week. And the return of this show, in a way, has brought me back to doing this podcast. Back in August, when we had finished wrapping up Hijack, this series was originally planned to air towards the end of August, and it was the next series that I had planned to discuss here on the show. And then the writer's strike dragged on, and the actor strike continued and seems to be finally nearing resolution. And once that was delayed and I couldn't think of the next thing to cover, I was planning on covering movies and other topics that I have interest in, but really couldn't find the time and the motivation to come up with a new topic for coverage. And other things came up as well. I had a hip replacement. I'm recovering fine, by the way, and I'm not 90 years old, just happen to have a very bad hip. But that wasn't the reason I wasn't publishing. Honestly, I had a lot of time off with my hip replacement and was actually binging shows I had missed out on, was watching movies that I hadn't caught up on in this past year. And that actually became part of the issue I was having in what this show had become, where I was pursuing shows that I wasn't necessarily interested in. I was just trying to guess at what might be popular in the near future and really moving away from what my original intention was here on the podcast, which was to create some evergreen material that I could review or share with friends and family, talking about movies and series and music that I think was classic or oftentimes forgotten, but should have further appraisal. And that was really the spirit of my recommendations, and remains that I love to re-explore and then introduce people to things that I was and am passionate about that don't get that kind of coverage. So almost as an excuse to cover the popular thing, but then discuss these additional things. And really, this series, this podcast had moved further and further away from that. As I mentioned, just trying to guess at what the next thing might be that might be popular and get some listeners. So I was thinking about all this, and primarily thinking about it because there were things that I was catching up on and reviewing and really enjoying without thinking about how do I turn this into content. And all of these things made the idea of coming back to the podcast a little difficult. All that is to say is that I am interested in seeing this particular series, the one we'll be covering here. So we will be discovering it here on the podcast. But along with that, I will be pursuing these other topics, making even more recommendations than I did in the past, and oftentimes maybe doing deeper dives into topics, films that I think are classic or should have more attention than they do now, and discussing them in greater detail. And oftentimes pairing them up with movies or TV series that are in popular conversation at that time. So it's a work in progress, and I will outline some of those changes as I figure them out going forward. But for now, pretty traditional format for our show. We'll be breaking down this particular season of television, which will run for 7 episodes, I believe, right up until Christmas. And then in the new year, we'll see what the format of the show looks like. There is a lot of stuff to cover from a TV standpoint. But once again, I don't think I'm going to be sometimes dedicating 10 weeks for a show that I end up not liking in the end. So we'll see the formatting in the future. Maybe recommendations and then check-ins, and then coming back for final analysis at the end of a series. A lot of things I caught up on, I will probably be discussing here in greater detail. One of the series that I binged during my rehabilitation was For All Mankind, which was a recommendation from one of our listeners. And I really did enjoy it. And I had an interesting experience with it where oftentimes I was irritated with the soap opera machinations of the plot. And then yet, when everything clicked into place, usually towards the end of each one of these seasons, it really paid off, because even the shorthand soap opera machinations of the character interactions had pulled me in. And strangely, maybe made it more bingeable because of its flaws. So I do think that's an interesting thing to explore. And by the way, the new season has just begun. I've not caught up on it yet, but do definitely plan to. So there's one thing that I'll probably be discussing in the somewhat near future. But I do have 2 things that I do not think enough people are watching that I did catch up on during my rehabilitation, that I really am just so over the moon, so impressed with how excellent these 2 products were. Both on HBO Max, by the way, or Max, I guess it is now. The first one is 100-Foot Wave. This is a docuseries about a somewhat over-the-hill surfer, Garrett McNamara, who relatively late in his career discovers a new surfing locale off the coast of Portugal, Nazaré, Portugal, and basically turns it into a competitive location for surfing where the waves are so tall, not quite 100 feet, but it's this search he has for this impossible 100-foot wave. This series is so fulfilling in so many ways. You can watch with the whole family. There are occasional swear words, but aside from that, something you can watch with your kids, even younger children. My daughter's only 8 years old. She loves this show. The characters are so well realized. You really get to know these people so intimately. You see their backstories, but also the way the film is made. The visuals, especially in season 2, where they had a budget upgrade with the HBO purchase, are absolutely stunning. You can just keep this running in the background on a nice high quality television just for the visuals. But it's more fulfilling than that because it's not just this kind of pleasant scenery to watch. There's so much drama in these people risking their lives, and they all come with troubled backgrounds. You can imagine becoming very proficient at a sport that could potentially kill you. You have a lot of people with complicated backstories. Their biographies are so diverse, and yet they are all drawn to this particular thing. So I love this kind of exploration of passion and the things that drive people to pursue sports, to try to excel even when it can destroy them. And then as these people become older, you see them age over time. This series, this archive footage from the first season covers over 10 years. And you see these people who are very young when they begin, and now they have families and they have responsibilities and they have bills to pay. They have tried to settle down. This is their livelihood. So now it's become a job. And in a lot of ways, it's almost a metaphor for the gig economy and how you have to kind of just hustle all the time to make this thing work out. So it's all these things at the same time. I'm also Portuguese, so I love seeing this beautiful locale and also exploring this actual culture of this coastal town that now is a tourist destination for people all over the world, and how it has transformed that culture and that population as well. I have this philosophy in general that if you look at one thing really, really, really closely and explore it really deeply, that you can kind of understand the world in a different way from just exploring one thing and just digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think this is a perfect example of it. And I mean, this is truly a remarkable, remarkable show. And I would recommend it to everybody. Like, this is like unqualified recommendation to anybody out there. So check that out. Once again, 100-Foot Wave. It is coming back for season 3. There was a tragedy last year during the shooting of this show. Oh, back to season 2. Fascinatingly, it, of course, bumps into COVID, and you see how it impacts these people. And it also becomes kind of a metaphor for how we all dealt with COVID at the time and the strains it put on this new economy that was building up around this very popular event. So a fascinating look at a different view of what happened, COVID and the disruptions it caused, and the positives of it, as well as the family expanded within the show itself. But do catch up on this at any time before season 3 comes back, which I think is coming back early next year, probably around February or March. Check this out. This is a truly great work of documentary and exploration of self-discovery and self-definition in a way of like defining yourself through your activities. So it's really an incredible piece of filmmaking in general, and highly recommended. I mean, my highest recommendation, do check this out. Also on HBO Max, just wrapped up recently, very, very highly recommended, a truly astonishing, surprising, unexpected, recent series. Recommended to really anybody, but I know some people have blockers around animation. This is an animated show. Some people have blockers around science fiction, and this show is both of those. And I would say, even if you have your particular qualms in those regards, please do check this out. This is an incredible achievement as well. This show is called Scavengers Reign. I do not know if this show has been renewed for season 2. Anecdotally, it seems to be getting a lot of buzz and a lot of positive reaction. So I would assume that there will be a renewal. And this is, as I mentioned, a science fiction and animated series, 2D animation. And it's about a crew of a freighter that crash lands on a planet. This is sometime in the future. And the few people who escaped the freighter itself onto the planet have landed in diverse areas. And it's just how they are trying to survive the planet surface. And the story drags on. It's 12 episodes. They're all short, maybe 20 minutes each. So pretty quick binge if you want to catch up on it. For me, maybe the finale of the show is the least successful. By the way, not because it's bad, but just because it's conventional, because everything until then is absolutely unconventional and surprising and just so stunning. But basically what the show explores is how these people stuck in this completely foreign and impossible situation are constantly improvising, constantly engineering, and it's in a way as grim and grotesque, oftentimes beautifully grotesque, by the way. This is kind of like nature horror, like I would analogize it to Annihilation, the film, where you see that nature is in a way consuming these people as they try to survive on the planet's surface. But in a way, it's incredibly uplifting in the fact that these people with their wits and creativity are actually able to survive. But there's even more going on. It's this exploration of how, yes, scavengers reign, as the title says here, but that there is some kind of balance where the characters and the species that we see on the planet that are successfully thriving are cohabitating one with the other. And there's this balance that's being explored in the show. And I believe will be explored also these ideas of power balance as well, if this show gets a second season, which I highly hope it does. Anyway, once again, just watch it. It is completely surreal, completely mind-bending, absolutely beautiful to look at, often grotesque, but in the most fascinating ways. This natural world that these people are trying to live within, the rules of it seem to be very well described, the symbiosis of these different characters and these different species, I should say. It's truly fascinating. I don't even want to spoil it. Any plot description would sound absolutely bizarre, but trust me, it works really, really well in the context of the show itself. This was based on a short film, I think from a few years ago, and now some 5 or 6 years later expanded to this series here on HBO. And once again, I do hope, if I can encourage anybody to watch this and the ratings are strong enough, they'll make another season of it. It does, by the way, if you're worried, well, I don't want to watch it if it's not going to get renewed. Trust me, it has a very satisfying ending. It can be the end of the season, I should say, apologies, the end of the show itself, but also sets up a potential season 2. And I would love to see this world and these characters and their relationships explored more fully in another season. So check that out. Once again, Scavengers Reign on Max. Okay, with this out of the way, I also started watching the new season of Fargo on FX. Many comments I have about that show. Equally fascinating, exciting, thrilling, and absolutely frustrating. Many times I feel like turning the show off just in the few episodes I've seen of it so far. So I will save that, my commentary and my very conflicted opinions on that new season of the show, for another episode. But I will definitely be watching that going forward as well. So expect to hear comments about that. I'll be discussing The Killer, the new David Fincher movie on Netflix, which I found utterly fascinating, if perhaps initially disappointing. So all things I will explore in short upcoming episodes. But for now, let's get into my conversation with Sona regarding the first 3 episodes of A Murder at the End of the World. All right, Sona. So I'm going to be very rusty here. I haven't done this in a long time.
Me too.
I am going to put a header on this episode where I'm going to talk a little about what's been going on. Why haven't we recorded, the strikes ending, and but also just stuff that was going on in our lives, etc. And I have some recommendations of things that I watched along the way, and I'll save it all for there. But since we're talking about television, we have talked just this weekend actually, but since we're talking about television specifically, and it doesn't have to be television, it could be any kind of media that you've been consuming in this 2.5 month break from our conversations. Was there anything that you saw or read or experienced that you would highly like to recommend, or even modestly recommend to anybody out there?
Yes, and it is The Real Housewives of New York and The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City.
Oh, I knew it.
Some things never changed.
You've been enjoying this. You're like, I can watch unlimited reality TV.
I've really been enjoying them, I have to say. Listen, I'm not saying that it's intellectual. I'm not saying that it's enriching, but it does hold my interest. These ladies are very interesting. Some interesting things are happening to them, and I am happy to be along for the ride.
I unfortunately cannot
confirm
or deny the quality of these shows.
I understand.
But it is good to hear that. I should say, I know from my conversations with others that there definitely are up years and bad years on these shows.
Exactly.
So these are better. I would take it from what you're describing.
Yes, there are definitely some years where you're kind of like, just retreading the same ground again. And why am I doing this to myself? But these 2, I can't speak to other Real Housewives seasons because I have limited myself to just New York and Salt Lake City, but both of them very interesting right now.
We'll check in again. Are they near? I don't even know where they are in their cycle. Are they near completion? Where are they at?
New York is finished. It might have had a shortened season. I'm not sure about that because they brought in a whole new cast, and I think they weren't entirely sure how that was going to land. And I think depending on who you ask, it landed differently, but I enjoyed it, especially because New York has a South Asian housewife.
Oh, interesting.
That has a specific appeal to me. And Salt Lake City is going on. I think it's wrapping up in the next few weeks, but apparently something very scandalous is about to happen.
Oh, interesting. Let me know when that happens, and we can check back in. I
Will
will
do.
vicariously enjoy these shows through you.
I'll do what I can to, whatever is the opposite of dumb it down. I'll do what I can to make it seem somewhat interesting to you.
So I have dragged you kicking and streaming away from the Bravo network to watch A Murder at the End of the World. And did you watch all 3 available episodes? Did you
I
catch all 3
have.
of them?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Very cool. I just watched the 3rd one this morning, actually. Or last night.
Now, somehow from the title At the End of the World and the previews with all the snow, I decided they were going to be in Antarctica. So it was very disappointing for me when they are not, in fact, in Antarctica, but we'll get to that.
I actually suspected that as well. This is back when I first saw the trailer, which is like, this thing has been, I literally was looking forward to this a year ago, like last November or December, I think was when the first stills came out. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's coming out soon. And then they kept delaying it and delaying it. Then it was supposed to come out in the summer. And then the strike hit. They delayed it all the way till now. So here we are, finally, a year later. And part of the reason that I came back to record this actually was because it was going to kick off like within a week or so of us wrapping up Hijack. So I'm like, oh, great. We'll have like a week off and then the next show will start. And then, of course, we had 3 months of strikes. And but this was the show I was planning to cover next. So therefore, I am kind of sticking to my word in a way. Okay, so I pitched this to you as the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo meets kind of a straight-faced Glass Onion, mostly because you have all these people meeting on this compound with this billionaire. And there is a hacker who's, kind of an edgy, kind of antisocial female protagonist. It was even more on the money than I suspected, honestly. Maybe let's break it down a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you for your opinion. Okay. So to anybody out there who's curious about this show show starts Emma Corrin, who played Princess Di in the 5th season, I believe it was, of The Crown. I think that's what she's most famous for. You also have Clive Owen here, who I think is a little underserved so far in these first 3 episodes, although he's always a magnetic character, so I'm sure he will have much more to do in the show over time. It's 3 episodes in now. They had 2 last week, 1 this week. I think it's only 7 episodes, so almost halfway through this thing. So
oh, wow.
Not a long investment of time, which is good. And it will be wrapping up right as the Christmas season hits. So nice snowy time, I think, to probably wrap up the show. And we also have Harris Dickinson here, who most notably recently has been in the Academy Award nominated The Triangle of Sadness from last year, and also was in a movie that probably many more people saw, which was the film adaptation of Where the Crawdads Sing. And a bunch of other recognizable people. You have Alice Braga is here. You have Joan Chen, who has like some Twin Peak vibes here. They brought her here, I think, intentionally to make us think about Twin Peaks. And looking absolutely incredible at 70 years old. She looks amazing for a 70-year-old, I got to say. Not to be ageist, but still. And, of course, playing Clive Owen's wife is Britt Marling, who writes most of the things that she's in. Most famously, her last project was The OA on Netflix, which is an absolutely batshit crazy show that we have to, I think I'm going to spoil it for you at some point. But anybody out there who, this is one of those strange times, I would highly recommend something that I do not think is good, because you will just be jaw on the ground being like, I cannot believe someone made this show. And it was on for 2 seasons. It is absolutely one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And if I describe it to you, you would literally be like, Victor, no, you're joking. I'm like, nope. All those things happened on this show. Yes, it did.
What's interesting is that exact description would be how I feel about Paw Patrol, but neither here nor there.
Yes, we just watched the Paw Patrol movie just yesterday, I think. So
right, none of it lines up. So many plot holes.
Oh, I have a grand theory about Paw Patrol, by the way, that there is the TV series, that it is a commentary. Mayor Goodwin is like a satirical version of a knee-jerk liberal. What's the bad mayor's name? Humdinger. Mayor Humdinger is the stereotypical like capitalist pig who's like, like basically purely greed versus like totally clueless kindness No matter how many times he like stabs her in the back, she continues to fall for it.
But we digress.
We digress, yes. I'd like to have deep reads on some of these kids shows, which are just head scratching, like bizarre. So yes, so this is Britt Marling with her creative partner Zal. I can't pronounce his last name. Manglage. It's quite a name. They have worked together really from the beginning, and I've actually liked their movies. They Sound of My Voice, which to anybody out there who's a fan of the OA, it's basically the OA in an hour and a half, which works better for me, to be honest. A really interesting film about this. People who get indoctrinated into like a terrorist cult group, like kind of like a liberal terrorist cult group called The East, I think the name of the movie was. And these are all interesting projects. They have a lot of shared themes, oftentimes like developing cults around ideology.
Mm-hmm.
So they have these kind of interesting points of reference. I do enjoy their work in general, but flabbergasted, like totally head scratchingly dumbfounded by the OA as a project. But this, I think so far has been much, much more successful for me.
I like it.
So you're enjoying it so far? That was my first question to you.
I am enjoying it so far. I wonder maybe if the pacing is a little bit off. There are times that it feels a little bit slow, but
yep.
It's okay. Maybe also because the only other things I'm really regularly watching right now are Real Housewives shows. It feels like a fine investment of my time, even when it's not paced as well as I think it possibly could be.
What's interesting about it to me is that I found, for example, the OA, which I just binged recently as kind of prep work for this show. I had not seen it previously, even though it had been recommended to me a few times, but I'd heard such strange things about it. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to like that. I did and didn't at the same time. So fascinating watch. But nonetheless, I found like all the seasons, all the episodes there to just be way too long. And I was kind of concerned that the episodes here are all over an hour long so far, just 3 episodes. But I have to say that I definitely feel oftentimes, especially like with Netflix shows, this is not a Netflix show, it's on FX and Hulu. I oftentimes feel the episodes are too long. And for some bizarre reason, I cannot explain, and I could totally understand why you feel the way you do. It hasn't bored me. Like I feel like the show is always showing me something new. And I think the reason I'm not bothered by it here in this particular circumstance is I do like the bifurcated past storyline and current storyline. It keeps me like never disinterested. You know what I mean? Like I think it that works. I don't know if it's going to pay off because the two stories don't seem to intersect, but I could be wrong about that. So I don't know if it's going to pay off, but it keeps me interested.
I am assuming that they will intersect at some point. Otherwise, the whole thing seems very strange to me to structure it this way. But I think part of what's strange to me about the pacing is not in the past storyline, but in the present storyline.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel, it feels slow for a bunch of people who are stuck together and someone was just killed.
Yeah.
Right? Like it feels like a strange mood for that situation. Like the mood of it is not matching the actual scenario to me.
True. If I felt that slowness, and definitely with I'm in some ways more interested in the flashback storyline than I am in the contemporary storyline.
Yeah.
And I do agree that when they were, and we'll get to it because I do want to walk through some of these events in chronological order, that in episode 3, when there is just a lot of like trudging around the snow, I was kind of like, couldn't this be tighter? Do we really need all these different, very similar scenes, right? One right after the other. So the setup of the show, just to get into it a little bit.
No, I've been derailing you. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, no, not
Let's
at all.
Get back
no,
on.
Not at all. I don't want to do a whole plot breakdown, to be honest with you, but just to kind of in general terms, Darby is our main protagonist. She is a 20-something. The actress is 27. They shot this like 2 years ago. I think this is accurately around her age, like mid-20s.
I think in this last episode, they said she was 24.
24. I think the actress was probably 25 when she made this, but I think so. So I think it's close in the way it's referenced here. But there's a flashback element to the show where we see her investigating a serial killer. Theoretically, I guess she's like college age there. So maybe she was around 21 or 20, something like that.
I was trying to put together a timeline and I wasn't sure if she's in high school or college. I think at some point they say that it's been 6 years since she saw Bill. So I thought that put her at 18 the last time she saw him.
That makes sense, actually, now that you say all that. I was trying to square the circle in my mind, being like, well, she'd probably be college age, but you're absolutely correct because we find out that there is video of him or photographs of him with the Brit Marling character Lee in 2018, which would be 6 years
Oh,
in the
okay.
past, I guess,
Yeah.
in the time. I mean, I guess it'll be 5 years. But I mean,
5, right.
regardless, she had still not seen him before then. So it's at least like 5 years. So yeah, she would be 18 or 19
Yeah.
years old, something like that.
And that one time she's in the class and texting with him, it feels like a high school class to me.
Yeah, that's a very good
But
point.
it
That's a
wouldn't
very good point.
have to be, but it
True,
feels that
true.
way to me. I
Yeah.
think sometimes this is kind of a tangent. I think sometimes when the characters have an older partner, they try and make the person 18 just so that there are no issues. Do you
Yes,
know what I
exactly.
mean?
Yep. I actually had the exact same thought in my mind that I'm like, she could play even 16 in some of those scenes with like
Yeah.
her dad. And I have to say that in her flashback, I think that I find her in the contemporary times, and it's also this probably austere setting, she comes off as being a little cold, no pun intended. There is almost like a little too little to her character in the contemporary timeline. And I really like her performance playing this younger version of herself. She has a very
Mhm.
teenage vibe. I think she's actually doing an interesting thing there.
Yeah. I am wondering, and now I really am off on a tangent, but I am wondering how much we'll learn about her whole backstory because there seems to be a lot going on there that I don't know if we'll be told it or we'll be shown it, but I feel like, I have a lot of questions about how she grew up.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a possible theory, but we'll see. Maybe I'll save it because it could be spoilers inadvertently because I don't know anything about the show, but I don't want to spoil something big accidentally. So she's become we at the beginning of the show, it looks like she's become somewhat famous, at least within these internet sleuthing circles, in having written a book where she pursued a serial killer. Apparently, I don't know, it's kind of left open as to whether they caught them, but at least tracked this person down. And this apparently has raised her profile enough where this billionaire called Andy, what a name for a billionaire, not the most not what I would call my billionaire if I was writing a script, but hey, Andy, sure, has he kind of gets together every year, some annual thought leaders. Why this 20-something-year-old girl is on the
Exactly.
itinerary is a big question mark, but I think intentionally so. I think that is one of the mysteries of the show, to understand how these more powerful people are trying to use this character. And also simultaneously, like you mentioned already, we see her backstory. She's very adept at doing investigations. She grew up with a father who was a forensic examiner. He kind of trained her to be a detective and to think about mysteries in this way. And also, I think that there's a pretty charming romance that is being fleshed out in these flashbacks with this character played by Harris Dickinson, who plays a character called Bill, another very exciting character named Bill, but who also goes by the name Fang, which makes him kind of like a Banksy, or he's supposed
Right.
to be some kind of Banksy political type artist. And this is very much like a manic pixie dream boy character, which is, by the way, Brit Marlin in her scripts. There's always this kind of idealistic, really smart, very attractive character that so it's kind of she flips the table, she gets to write her own scripts, she gets to use a cliche in the opposite direction. Hey, no problem, I don't have a problem with that, but I just calling out that is kind of a motif in all of her scripts as well. He's got some horrible hair, by the way.
The haircut situation in this show between these two is really
Yes,
rough. I don't love what she has going on in the past, but it's acceptable to me.
yes.
Bill's
Exactly.
hair, this is one of
Like a
these
mullet with bangs
generational
is very strange, but
kids today
yes.
situations for me. I mean, this is just so unappealing. And then whatever she has going on now is fine, except I don't know if it's the editing or whatever in the current day. Sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's purple,
Yeah.
sometimes it looks more blonde. I just don't understand. There's no consistency in her hair color, but I can live with that too.
Oh, and I think that is actually another bizarre motif with these showrunners and creators, that they also have that. It's almost as if you took like a caricature of, like you said, the kids today, if you almost took like a caricature of like, this is how hipsters are dressing now, like the characters in their shows basically are almost stereotypically styled that way. Not that those people don't exist, by the way. Like, you go to Brooklyn, you definitely see people like this. It's just a little on the nose in a way, but
Yeah, for sure. Especially Bill, I think. But
yes, he's really like kind of like with the almost not there tattoos on his face and everywhere. It's just kind of an
yeah.
odd stylistic choice. They all have tattoos. He has tattoos. She has tattoos.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's the girl and boy with the
Tattoos have become very popular, so
yes,
that part
yes,
tracks for
definitely.
sure.
So I think we mentioned this in the conversation or in text that I like the fact that the show will veer into like straight up horror tone. For example, where you don't know if she's being stalked by someone or if there's something supernatural going on, someone's communicating with her.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turns out it's this AI assistant who was actually like one of my favorite characters in the show, I think. But but it's interesting that they will basically allow the show to lean fully into horror and then but there's nothing truly horror on the show, but I do enjoy that. It makes it adds a little extra spice to what could be pretty slow mystery like you mentioned before.
Well, I really hope there's nothing supernatural because I always hope there's nothing supernatural, first of all. Also, I will add in the present day, the scenery is really interesting and fun. And like as a person who hates being cold, this is how I like to see the cold through the TV screen,
Yes.
It looks beautiful. And, just the hotel and the high-tech gadgetry of it, like all of that is just very appealing to me as a viewer to watch. Like it's just very interesting.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. So once again, just for anybody who hasn't seen the show yet, is using this as some kind of guide as to whether they've been interested or not. These group of people, esoteric and strange combination of specialists, get flown out to this beautiful hotel in Iceland. I think it's actually shot in Iceland, I believe. I think very popularly there are these snowbound mystery novels, whether it's Smila's Sense of Snow or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and some of these other very popular Nordic mystery novels of the past decade or so. And yeah, it's beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just the hotel rooms look right out onto these snowscape. It's really lovely.
Yeah, there are mountains and there are snowdrifts and there are cliffs. Yeah.
But an interesting choice in a way to make it almost very sparse because there are also you've probably seen Icelandic vistas that are like rocky and have a lot of strange vegetation or something like that, like we've seen in what is that movie Ex Machina, where that hotel is just incredible, and I think it's an actual place you can Airbnb. But this is like almost minimalist in a way, but in an interesting way, like you mentioned. I love the sight of like the mountain through their windows.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of things I thought were kind of interesting in the first episode was their use of music.
Great music. Sorry, I just got excited and I
Sure.
interjected. My
No, not a problem.
cooperative overlap. I've learned that's, the phrase for when you interrupt someone, but not because you disagree with them, but because you agree with them and you're just so excited. I love Annie Lennox, and I thought this was a
Yeah.
great use of that "No More I Love Yous" song.
Yeah, and even before then, I thought it was really clever that in the opening scene, she's listening to the Doors song "The End" on her headphones, and then
Mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
think it's on the soundtrack, but then she turns off her iPod, so she's actually listening to it diegetically, and then. Of course, the title we've just seen on the screen is "The Myrtle at the End of the World." And then she walks in to do her reading and she says, I'm going to tell you this story. I'm going to start at the end. Right. So it's like there's a lot
Mm-hmm,
of
mm-hmm.
wittiness in the show, which, by the way, the show in general does not seem playful, but I do like the
No.
playfulness of this idea, right? At least, which makes me want to. I mean, it invites you to play along, right, in a way, which I like because I think in general the show is pretty austere, very David Fincher-ish in its style. But speaking of the girl with the dragon tattoo, but then
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, speaking of this difference between this very austere present day and definitely a warmer feeling of this romance in the past. I love this fight, and you already touched on it. I love this fight in the car that gets resolved by them just like in real time, listening to like No More I Love Yous all the way through
Mm-hmm.
because it's much more realistic than like how you actually get over a fight than to talk it all through. I thought it was really clever.
Personal note that then it made me sad that I had never actually seen Annie Lennox perform in person. And then I went on Ticketmaster to see if she happened to be touring,
I think she's
which she
touring.
is
I think she
not.
will be touring soon if she's not touring
Oh,
already.
I'm going to look out for that then.
You have a chance.
She may have, there's a chance she was at one of the Lilith fairs I went to, really dating myself now, but I don't have a vivid memory of it. So I don't think so. But I also think, and the specifics are escaping me, but in the next episodes as well, I remember having the thought that the music is really well done in this show, even though I can't recall a specific reference to a song right now.
Yeah, I think that No More I Love You is definitely gonna make some streams on that song. I think that's going to be a conversation point. Although I do in general like all the music. They played some Portishead. They played Tricky, which is like one of my favorite artists, but like definitely not a mainstream artist. Moody music, which of course sets the tone well.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of culminates with them having a very Agatha Christie-like setup. And I think this would be my critique, actually, of the setup so far. I find the characters, the reason that I think those Agatha Christie adaptations, and maybe even in the writing of the novels, there's always this kind of like very melodramatic or very hammy introduction to the different characters. It's almost like so you know who they are in shorthand later. And I think Rian Johnson, I don't love that Knives Out, Glass Onion films in general. I don't think they're as good as everybody says they are, but I do think he nails that. You know who this character is within a second of seeing them, so that you know why someone would want to kill them, what their motivation is, whether you kind of like them or kind of hate them, so that, when they disappear for, great lengths of the story, they still kind of stick in your mind. And I don't think the show's done a good job of making me not only not care about these characters, like even understand like who they are, like what their motivations are. So yeah, I do hope the show does flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think if anything, so far it's doing that very stereotypical thing of getting you attached to somebody just for them to die almost
Right.
immediately after you learn
Immediately
something about
afterwards.
them.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is, kind of a trope, I think. And, so maybe we'll learn about all the characters that way as they die off one by one. I don't know.
And that's, speaking of people dying, that's what happens at the end of episode 1. We see that Bill, of all people, you forgot to mention that Bill is there. He shows up, not on the plane with everybody else, but apparently he has already been there, sits right across from Darby at the dinner that night. She's kind of shocked to see this, but then they kind of patch things up, and it's actually pretty sweet, their interactions. I think they have very good chemistry, which I think is important for this show, by the way. She goes to meet up with him that night. She hears something in his room. She goes outside. Once again, all these rooms are like looking out onto the snow. So she loops outside of the building, can see him as he's basically dying inside. And he asks her not to leave, keep eye contact until he dies. She goes and grabs somebody, but it's too late. He's already passed away. We find out in episode 2.
And
yeah,
he's
that's the
told
setup.
her that he has something important to tell her.
Yes,
So
exactly. Yes.
we have that hanging out there of, well, what was it that he thought was so important that he needed to share it?
Exactly.
And by the way, also, I just want to mention, I don't know if liked is the right word, but in the past timeline, when he leaves her, his message to her, this is both too much and not enough, I thought was like very, I don't know, it stirred something in me. I thought it was nicely done. I think it's a very human feeling about a relationship. I think it's too much and it's not enough.
Going back to the way they wrote the OA, part of the reason I was able to go through that show is because they really nail some things really well. Like, for example, the interactions in the car while they're listening to No More I Love Yous. While so much of this show seems contrived, that really feels like something that happened to someone for real. And it feels like a real moment. And that note, like you said, is absolutely the same way. And you see how good that dynamic is, once again, in the flashback sequences, that he seems to be just kind of like he's a tourist. He just likes to solve mysteries. He's just having fun. And now it's like I'm writing this story myself, but I think that's what good writing does. It makes you fill in the blanks. I'm feeling like he's going deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, but really to kind of be a little macho in front of her and to show his interest. And then he gets to like, whoa, this is getting way too far, because in those flashback scenes, we see that they almost die, right? And he's just like, okay. And to the point of like that note he leaves her, this is too much, like too much of an experience. And at the same time, she's never going to be the number one concern for, in her mind. So he feels like this isn't enough, right? Like, for me to sacrifice this much, is this enough? I don't know but that's another thing that's very ambiguous. Maybe this will be fleshed out, but you'll assume if this was like 6 years earlier, 5 years earlier, and these people are in their 20s, that this guy couldn't have been like a world famous artist at this point, right? He must have been just, baby artist at this point, right?
In the past,
he's not Banksy. In other words, he can't be Banksy at this point, right? In the flashbacks.
It wasn't even clear to me that he was an artist already in the past timeline.
Right. That's what I mean. Like that all happened later, right?
See, that was my conclusion. Yes.
Not that that's explained, to be honest, but it is kind of a silly thing, right? That they just kind of hung out together and they solved this mystery together. And now he's Banksy and she's Elizabeth Salander, or whatever her name was. It's like, I don't know. That's weird. Don't really buy any of that. But hey, you know what? It's TV. It's okay.
Yeah, it feels like maybe she introduced him to the idea of Lee, and then he somehow explored that further and maybe she became a benefactor of some sort. I don't know. I'm really just pulling things out of the air here, though.
And then in episode 2, she begins her investigation. I actually was so distrustful of everything that's going on in the show. At first, I was like, is he even dead? But then she sneaks into the room and his body's been laying there all day. So I assume he actually is dead. Lee comes in while she's still in the room. And
this girl is really good at pushing herself up against walls, by the way. She's really good at hiding.
Yeah, really.
And being unobtrusive. Yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Unless it's a setup. Unless that's a setup too. Maybe they knew she was in there. But I mean, I'm over analyzing all of my potential clues here. But I mean, hey, this is the type of show that wants you to do that.
Ray knows she was in there. That's for sure.
Yeah. When she confronts Lee about it later, I found it very strange. Lee basically has her hacking onto the network. This is a pretty relatively simple hack to retrieve this password. The idea that when she tells her that, well, I couldn't get that password, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't even need to be a hacker. You could probably just, find it in your husband's belongings, or, just look at the cached passwords on his computer. And also really, really bad security in this place that they're using. The Nest is using the same Wi-Fi as like the security cameras. But it still made me think that, is this all a setup? This seems to be a little simple. And why can't Lee do these hacks herself? And if anything, the one big mystery made me wonder is this woman who's pretending to be Lee, this famous hacker, is she lying about who she is to get into the position she is in now?
That's so interesting because none of those questions occurred to me at all. I am just along for the ride here, I guess. You make a good point about why Lee couldn't do it, and Darby asks her, right?
She did. In this last to the show's episode, credit, they call all this stuff out. Yeah.
I guess my conclusion was that it is a very sophisticated system, but Darby is just that brilliant that she can do it.
Right.
But, maybe that's not the right conclusion, though.
Oh, I would say it's not, by the way, just so you know, the hack that she comes up with, she takes like a smart light bulb, she takes its data, and there's an unencrypted password in there. So it's like, this is not rocket science. It's like really like hacking 101, which is fine.
Well, okay, but I would
Joe Schmo Hotel.
I couldn't do it.
Oh no, but the reason I bring that up though, that is actually a legitimate hack that you can very easily do, like at Joe Schmo Hotel. But you would think that Clive Owen's character is going to have like very high security. This guy's like Elon Musk or whatever. He's not going to just like have, the security cameras, or shouldn't anyway, have the security cameras and the Nest devices or whatever on the same network. Then again, of course, in our own personal home, we probably have that set up exactly. So, warning to everybody out there: use your guest, Wi-Fi for the. Have two different Wi-Fi setups in your house. Don't let everybody onto your internal Wi-Fi. And then there's a bit of a jump scare here when she finally gets access to those cameras, and we see somebody with a mask on. Which, once again, there's like this kind of like element of what could this be? Turns out to not be horrific, but I do like the fact that it's constantly teasing us with these scares. And I think that's pretty much what happens in episode 2 primarily, right? Is there anything else that you...
I don't think this is a significant plot point, or maybe it will be, but I'm curious about why they've introduced this character of their little boy, Zoomer, which again, what's up with the name? But
right.
He has more of a role here than I would expect for a 5.5-year-old boy, or however old he is. He says his age at one point, it's 5 something. So I'm just wondering if something's going to be developed relating to the kid somehow.
I totally agree. I actually have that in my notes also, that there's no way in episode 2, they spend so much time. You have these scenes where, like, to your point, there's just a long passage where the kid is just behaving and interacting with his parents, and she's just watching him. They make such a big deal about that kid. He's definitely going to pay off in some way. I have no theory on it either. I'm just like, he's befriending her in episode 3. He lets her use his AR headset, which seems to be like, I mean, this show doesn't have tons of special effects. That seems to be a relatively complex thing to introduce at this point. I assume it's going to be bigger in the show, because why else even bother showing us that augmented reality POV? But yeah, I mean, they spent a lot of time with this kid. I have a feeling that it's going to be even more so in the future. I don't know how it's going to pay off though.
Yeah.
Well, one thing, now that I'm doing the math, and let's just jump to episode 3, we find out that Lee and Bill knew each other. There seems to be some kind of sexual jealousy potentially from Andy's side. He's, made some disparaging comments about his artwork as well on the internet, apparently. She apparently met up with Bill she claims that he couldn't perform sexually when they did try to
Right.
hook up, and they decided to just be friends. But that's about 6 years ago. That would line up with this kid being,
Interesting.
and
Hmm.
he's blonde haired, right? So, usually dark hair is dominant
Dominant.
gene. So
Yeah.
the dad has dark hair. So why is this kid blonde? It's
Hmm.
a question mark right there.
Interesting.
So that's a potential theory of that.
Right.
But of course, episode three, actually pretty eventful episode three compared to, at least in the context of this show. She sees this masked figure wandering off in the snow. She follows him. It's kind of a pretty creepy scene. She almost gets caught at one point. She identifies him by his shoes or notices his shoes.
Very tense.
Yes. Every time I watch one of these movies, I'm like, I gotta learn Morse code. She knows the Morse code. He's communicating with somebody in the distance.
And it's kind of recalling that scene from earlier where he spells out happy birthday to her with the flashing lights at the train station. Remember, she's on a bike and he's talking to her. Yeah, and he's navigating her and he brings her to this place and it spells out happy birthday, Darby. And there's a woman saying this train station is cursed because the lights are flashing on and off.
Oh, yes, that's right. Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God. Okay, now I got it. Yes, yes, yes. It's interesting that they're seeing
Mm-hmm.
the Morse code thing now more than once. That is weird. I'm just, they've just made Morse code a very big deal in this show all of a sudden. Now that you made that reference, which I'd forgotten of. So I'm like, so now I'm kind of,
What's up with all the Morse
I'm
code
dumbstruck now. I'm just like,
references?
wow, is this all going to be Morse code related now?
It might have just been an establishing thing to show that she understands Morse code.
I know, but that would be, I mean, a lot of people know Morse code. You didn't really need that establishing scene. But you know what? These aren't the subtlest filmmakers, in my experience. So it is possible. I am hoping that it actually will pay off in some bigger way now that you've brought this up twice, because it seems a little much to have to explain that twice, via a previous scene.
Fair, especially for a hacker.
But especially for a hacker, good point, because oftentimes they'll use that, like different codes to hide things
Right.
in plain sight. So my question is, this message that turns out this is Rohan. Eventually we find out, because she identifies his shoes later on, and he admits to it also. But the message he sends, which is one down, still a go. How did you read that? One down, pretty clear what it means.
I for a second wondered if maybe her Morse code is a little rusty and it was like one down, 8 to go, or however many of them are left.
Right,
and they're
right.
just going to systematically kill them all off. And she had misunderstood. But
Right.
once the rest of the episode developed, it seems like, yes, it does say one down, still a go. And it just seems very like an impending doom kind of feeling to me. I don't know. What do you think?
I thought the still a go thing was that the plan was still a go. I agree, by the way, that when she
Right.
first translated it, I'm like, what did she say? Like, did I misunderstand what she said? And then
Yeah.
she says it to him later. But then at the very end of the episode, he mentions that Bill had some plan and it was very clever. Of course, that's exactly when they cut us off from discovering what that is. But that Bill apparently had some very clever plan to figure out what was going on at this compound or something. There was some revelation that he wanted to give him, and that basically there was some scheme they were pulling there collectively. And what I read that as is whoever else is involved with this is that it is one down, meaning that one of the people who are involved with this, obviously Bill, is no longer here, but still a go. I presume that means that the plan is still a go, or that the conclave is still a go. That's the other possibility,
yes.
right?
I'm sorry, what was the other possibility?
That he might have been saying that, for example, that the conclave itself was still a go. Like, for example, somebody died, but they could have canceled everything, right?
I see.
But no, it's still ongoing, basically.
No, I took it as the plan is still a go. And then I wondered if Bill was trying to include Darby in that when he said, come, I have something to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that plan was, that he was going to share it with her and see if she wanted to be a part of it. That part, just speculation. But I agree with you that there's some bigger plan.
Well, we found out, right, that there were 3 cups of tea. She smashed into someone delivering tea the night before when they found Bill's body. And she was trying to find out how many cups of tea did he order. It turned out it was 3. Turned out Rohan was this person. It wasn't nefarious. Basically, get confirmation that Rohan couldn't have been the killer from Andy. This is another thing that I do like about the show, is that so much of what's happening, I'm like, how is this tech genius not aware of all this crap that's happening on his network? But of course he knew. Andy basically confronts her and says, I don't want you doing these investigations. I know you've seen the security camera. I know that was Rohan at the door, but we can monitor your body temperature, basically, which we actually see the
Right.
AI do that, right? When she is almost
Yes.
hypothermia earlier in the episode.
Hypothermia, yeah.
And theoretically, you would assume they would also know if there was more than one person in the room, right? Because you could, if you're tracking a body, you probably know how many there are.
Exactly.
And then, of course, 3 cups of coffee, which, of course, or I should say tea, 1 for Rohan and presumably 1 for her, since he had just invited her to his room, right? So she, of course, took that as like a romantic. And from Rohan's reaction, maybe he did as well. But so that's the other question I have for you. So Rohan confesses that he loved him. It's interesting because he seemed like so eager to meet up with him that night, in him hiding his mask and talking about this plan. It seems like it wasn't for like a dalliance. It seemed like he was going knowing that this was part of this theory. But so how did you read that? Do you think him and Rohan were intimate, or do you think this was just he just loved him and like because he like thought he rescued him from his addiction or whatever?
That's how I took it, the latter. Rohan came across to me as a very sensitive soul kind of person, and I felt like, yes, he was just very bonded to him and very fond of him in a maybe a brotherly love way or a father-son love way, I don't know, but yeah, it seemed like, they had been through a lot together and they meant a lot to each other, but I personally didn't take it as romantic.
Because I started thinking to myself, like, what's the twist going to be? He supposedly hooked up with Lee, maybe even the mother of the child, obviously hooked up with, we see it, in the flashbacks, hooked up with Darby. No, did he hook up with Rohan too?
Slept with everybody. That's
the twist. Is the twist that he slept with everybody here? Is that what happened? But hopefully not. After the confrontation, and at first Rohan's a little aggressive with her, but then she kind of says, I know you loved him and owe it to him to figure this out. Rohan basically lays it all out there. No, this is what was happening. She figures out probably that she was the third conspirator here. And then, of course, Rohan has a heart attack, presumably. They did hint at the fact that he had a bad heart earlier in the episode, and he did strain it.
Yes.
So he had a heart attack, or someone is once again making a murder, doing another murder, and it is
making a murder. I like that phrase.
Making a murder. We got all the ingredients we need.
If you don't watch out, I'm going to make a murder.
Someone's making a murder. Do you think Rohan was murdered, by the way? I mean, at this point, I have to assume yes because of the show, but you could say that even if Bill was murdered, and it seems to be the case, that Rohan might have just had a heart attack. They kind of see that earlier.
I mean, when they were out on that snow cliff together, it's kind of like, have you been medically cleared for this kind of activity? Because you're at a high altitude and, it just seems like a bad idea to me, but I am not a cardiologist. I don't know. So I think, it is possible that it was just all too much.
Okay. Now, the biggest question I have for you, Sona, and apparently you would have said something about it if it was really a total turnoff to you. When they go to the big revelation,
ants or whatever the heck that was,
yes,
I did not
the swarm
care for
robots.
No,
I was just like, oh, Sona's out. She just quit the show.
I thought he was taking them. I thought he was taking them there to see the beautiful vistas. When that
look at my beautiful swarm robots.
Let me just check out of this until they get back to the lodge. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, oh boy, if they go deep into the swarm robot technology, Sona's not going to stick with this show.
You know me very well. Yeah. I did not care for it.
That was literally my reaction watching it today. I was like, oh, I think Sona's going to actually dig on this. Maybe it's a little too long for her episode to episode, but I think she's actually going to vibe with this. And then like the swarm robot showed up. I'm like, oh, Sona just turned the TV off. She just rage quit this show. I don't mind it. It's actual real technology that's being developed with this idea of like, almost like a hive behavior where you just program robots to say, like, for example, build something and they just like, mechanically do it and they work continuously. And anyway, it is probably the future of some of these technologies, but very surprising that is the direction the show went. And all of a sudden it'd be like hive robots. I'm like, what? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, after watching the OA, this is nothing. This is not the kind of kookiness. But speaking of kookiness, that might still be forthcoming in the show. She mentions the fact that and this is very much in line with the OA, for example, she can communicate with the dead. What did you think about that
Yeah.
revelation?
I thought originally she was just being a dramatic teenager, kind of.
Yeah.
Now it seems like there's her interpretation of what that means and how they speak to her or whatever it is. But I don't know. I'm not much into it. How about you?
My concern, I like the fact they backpedaled it almost immediately, where she almost means it like metaphorically, like that she like
Yeah.
picks up senses the way they died or something that, and it almost felt like reading it that way. Because I did get worried there for a second, because like the OA has to do with basically having near death experiences that allow you to travel through time. So it's like, oh boy, let's not go there.
I originally was kind of, especially the way it was introduced with, her first meeting with Bill, I was like, oh, she's just trying to hook him or impress him or,
Right, right.
seem interesting. But yeah, then I was kind of surprised when they returned to it after that. Yes, happily, she does not see herself as a medium, at least.
Not yet. We'll see.
Not yet.
You think the swarm robots are a problem? Wait till you find out she can communicate with the dead, literally. And another weird event this week, in this third episode, I believe, was when she started seeing everybody wearing these masks. Now, the fact that she might just be feeling paranoid or something, that I could buy. But there's this really weird thing where she's like shaking her head and people are looking at her going like, what's happening? That seems like she's actually having some kind of episode there. So once again, I don't know if she's become an unreliable narrator in some ways, which of course would be part of the mystery, seeing most of the show through her eyes. So that would be a little too much for me. I think if they, we can't even rely on her. I think she needs to be our eyes and ears, and there could be a lot of weirdness going on and everybody's real motives, but hopefully we get a pretty clear point of view character. I don't want to have her suddenly having psychedelic experiences all over the place.
Maybe they're drugging her.
That is legitimately possible, right?
Oh gosh, what is it with Nicole Kidman? Nine Perfect Strangers. Maybe it's a Perfect Strangers crossover of some sort. Also, it could be that she's in a very stressful situation. She's sleep deprived.
Yes.
Her body has been through a lot physically. I mean, I could see.
Yeah, hypothermia can give you delusions too. So that could have been.
Yeah, I could see it having a very logical explanation as well.
Yeah, it could also just be a little too much. Like the same thing with the Morse code. It's just telegraphing too much, like where what could have been done in one scene where someone turns around, she sees the mask, they turn around again and it's gone, was like maybe taking a step too far. And once again, that could just be like the taste of the filmmakers themselves. I just hope that it doesn't start to add too many additional weird ingredients to the plot, because I do think it's working well as a pretty straightforward murder mystery at this point.
Well, from what you said about it being a pretty limited number of episodes, hopefully it's not going to go too far sideways, right? Because there just isn't enough time for it to do it, hopefully.
I'm very curious about the very last beat in this episode where the Clive Owen character, Andy, is basically like, uh-oh, we got two dead people here now.
Everyone in the bunker.
Everybody in the bunker. So everybody's going to be like locked up together. So, I mean, in some ways, I think that really becomes literally like a closed room mystery, right? I think that would be interesting to see, especially if people keep dying. Mm-hmm. Imagine just like it's like one of those murder mystery TV, game nights where you turn the lights off, you turn them on, someone's dead every time.
I've always wanted to do that. But yeah, I think he was just minutes from throwing Darby out, and now she's going to be locked up together with them.
I did also unintentionally, I think, or maybe intentionally, maybe they're being playful about this. I did love the fact that like she's talking to Bill at one point, and Bill's like, I have something really, really important to tell you. Meet me in my room in 5 minutes. Oh, I'm dead. Rohan's like, he had a really clever plan and it was all coming together. Let me tell you what it is. Oh, like literally dying, like in the process of telling her what every time someone's about to tell them, like spill it all out, they drop dead in front of her. But we will see. We'll see how many. I forget how many more guests there are. They're like so nondescript beyond like the kind of obvious ones. Maybe 7 episodes, maybe one person dies each episode. Who knows?
Yeah. It is really hard to kind of keep track of who all is there and what their things are. I mean, we know there's the doctor and we know there's the doctor.
Well, Alice Braga is a astronaut. She walked on the moon. Apparently there's an alternate history.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Who's now like a climate activist or something. What is I don't even remember what Joan
I
Chen
don't remember.
does for a living or whatever. I think she only has like one.
And then there's the guy who's reading her book on the plane. And I don't
Yes,
remember what he
who
does though.
that guy, whoever
He's an
that guy is.
actor, maybe? Director? Producer?
Oh
Hmm.
yes, yeah, this one that someone's like a filmmaker or something.
Yeah, somehow in the entertainment industry.
So yeah, that wraps up episode 3. I am enjoying it so far. I'm still in there.
Agree.
You're committed,
Let's
even if
see
there's more
what
swarm
the total
robots.
body count is. Let's see how many times we return to the robotic stuff. The AI I can put up with because it's been in furtherance of the plot. And I mean, I assume this other thing is too somehow in furtherance of the
Yeah.
plot. That is not a part of the plot I'm interested in.
You know what's funny is I like the AI character so much here. I didn't even question the fact that you're like, oh, Sona's not going to reject this character because, like you mentioned, it's almost like having like a Dr. Watson or something.
Yeah.
It's very clever to have the AI itself be a character here, and
Yeah.
and they're using it in a fun way. It's an interesting thing also as a device in the show because theoretically the AI could be telling her the truth. This AI was developed by this billionaire. The AI might be leading her astray, like right. So, or it
True.
might be ratting her out, not even intentionally, right? Like he might be tracking whatever questions she asks to the AI or whatever, right? So
True.
it becomes like a whole other element in the plot potentially too. So I thought that was interesting. But I just like him just popping up and like helping her out when she needs some help. It's like a fun little like invisible Watson character to have with her.
Yeah.
Have that type of character without really having another character. I mean, it's
I
an
agree
actual
with that.
actor. It's kind of fun. Yeah. So let's watch another episode and
We'll
we'll
see
catch up
what
next
happens.
week.
Yeah.
And I will probably be putting out a separate episode with just a whole bunch of reviews of things I've watched. Most of them not great, to be honest.
It's been a bleak time.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Enjoy your meals and family and such.
Same to you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Bye.
Talk to you soon.